We're going to start tonight with stuff the president says. He says a lot of stuff. You may be familiar with his Twitter account, and he says a lot of things that we choose as a country to ignore because this is our life now. In order for government to continue running, for the rule of law to remain intact, and even for us as citizens to maintain our sanity, we have to just ignore some of the stuff the president says. For instance, did you know that today our president told his friends at the Fox News channel that when he visited the UK last week, Queen Elizabeth enjoyed his company, the company of Donald Trump, more than she has enjoyed the company of anyone in decades. In decades. This is actually the second time in a week that he has told this to Fox News. The first time, he said he had heard from people that the Queen had never had a better time than she did with him, Donald Trump. Never. Queen Elizabeth is 93 years old. She has been the Queen for nearly 7 decades. But this was the pinnacle. This was the highlight of her reign. Might as well abdicate the throne now and hand it over to Charles. Nothing will top her time with Donald Trump. If you think about that claim from our president too long and too hard, you start to kind of twitch a little. I mean, it would be embarrassing for any American to make that claim. So it's the kind of stuff we ignore. It's background noise. It's Trump being Trump. But sometimes our president says things that demand a response. Sometimes he says something that is so offensive or so repellent that we feel like we have to respond to it just so that we're not implicated in it. We have to speak out against it to try to ensure that no one thinks we think it's acceptable. Sometimes he says something that implicates a specific, particular person, which feels like it demands some kind of response, either legally or just reputationally, like, say, in the case of the former White House counsel, Don McGahn.
Appointed. You know why? Because there was no crime. They had no evidence of crime.
He lays out a lot of evidence, including the episode where you ask your White House counsel, Don McGahn, you tell him Mueller has to go. You call him twice and say Mueller has to go. Call me when it's done.
Okay, now the story on that, very simply. Number one, I was never going to fire Mueller. I never suggested firing Mueller.
That's not what he says.
Excuse, I don't care what he says. It doesn't matter. That was to show everyone what a good counsel he was.
But why would Don McGahn lie? Why would he lie under oath? Why would he lie under oath?
Because he wanted to make
Mueller?
himself look like a good lawyer, or he believed it because I would constantly tell anybody that would listen, including you, including the media, that Robert Mueller was conflicted. Robert Mueller had a total conflict of interest. I didn't say that.
That right there, in the interview portion released today by ABC News, that is the president of the United States accusing his former White House counsel of a crime. He's accusing Don McGahn of lying under oath. But at the same time, the president is blocking Don McGahn from testifying to Congress about what McGahn told Mueller. He's telling McGahn, you got to keep quiet while I tell everyone you're a liar, a perjurer, which just seems like a completely untenable situation. If you're Don McGahn, how do you respond to this? How do you not respond to this? Here's the thing that's really new to our era, to this era of governance. Sometimes the president says something out loud that endorses or encourages behavior that is so wildly unethical or even blatantly illegal that in order for the rule of law to be maintained, someone else from the government has to step in and remind people that no, actually, you cannot do that thing, even though the president just told you so. A couple of months ago, CNN reported that on a visit to Calexico, California, near the Mexican border, the president, quote, told border agents to not let migrants in. Tell them we don't have the capacity, he says. If judges give you trouble, say, sorry, judge, I can't do it. We don't have the room. After the president left the room, agents sought further advice from their leaders who told them they were not giving them that direction. And if they did what the president said, they would take on personal liability. You have to follow the law, they were told. You have to follow the law, not what the president told you to do, which would be violating the law. There was also the time the president met with tribal leaders and told them to ignore federal laws preventing them from drilling on their land. Quote, President Trump hosted a group of Native American tribal leaders at the White House and urged them to just do it and extract whatever they want from the land they control. The chiefs explained to Trump that there were regulatory barriers preventing them getting at their energy. Trump replied, but now it's me. The government's different now. Obama's gone. We're doing things differently here. There was a pause in the room, and the tribal leaders looked at each other. Chief, Trump continued, addressing one of the tribal leaders. What are they going to do? Once you get it out of the ground, are they going to make you put it back in there? I mean, once it's out of the ground, it can't go back in there. You've just got to do it. I'm telling you, Chief, you've just got to do it. The tribal leader looked back at one of the White House officials in the room, perhaps somebody from the White House counsel's office, and he said, can we just do that? The official equivocated, saying the administration is making progress and has a plan to roll back various regulations. Spare a thought for that official from the White House counsel's office when someone asks, so are we allowed to break federal law like the President of the United States just told us to? But even that official, with the president sitting right there, reportedly could not bring himself to endorse the president's instruction to break the law. No, you cannot really do that. And then there was this, the president asking a room full of police officers to please be more violent with suspects.
When you see these towns and when you see these thugs being thrown into the back of a paddy wagon, you just see them thrown in, rough. I said, please don't be too nice. Like when you guys put somebody in the car and you're protecting their head, you know, the way you put their hand over. Like, don't hit their head, and they've just killed somebody, don't hit their head. I said, you can take the hand away.
After those comments, the head of a major U.S. law enforcement agency sent an email to his entire workforce reminding them that, in fact, they could not and should not do what the president was encouraging. The acting chief of the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, wrote to his organization, quote, the president, in remarks delivered yesterday in New York, condoned police misconduct regarding the treatment of individuals placed under arrest by law enforcement. I write to offer a strong reaffirmation of the operating principles to which we as law enforcement professionals adhere. I write because we have an obligation to speak out when something is wrong. Our core values are clear and applicable. Rule of law, respect and compassion, service, devotion, integrity, accountability, leadership, and courage, diversity. This is how we conduct ourselves. This is how we treat those whom we encounter in our work, victims, witnesses, subjects, and defendants. This is who we are. That acting DEA chief, Chuck Rosenberg, resigned a few weeks later, and now we are in the latest iteration of this pattern, this brand new pattern that we are all having to come to grips with as Americans, of the president publicly endorsing or advocating lawless behavior. After the president earlier this week said he would absolutely accept campaign help from a foreign government in the next election, and of course he would not report that to the FBI. What are you, crazy? The chair of the Federal Election Commission put out a statement which she prefaced by saying, I would not have thought that I needed to say this. Quote, statement regarding illegal contributions from foreign governments. Let me make something 100% clear to the American public and anyone running for public office. It is illegal for any person to solicit, accept, or receive anything of value from a foreign national in connection with a U.S. election. Any political campaign that receives an offer of a prohibited donation from a foreign source should report that offer to the FBI. That is the head of the U.S. agency that enforces campaign finance law. She says, yes, I know the president said you should do it, but you cannot do that. And just last month, the president's hand-picked FBI director said the same thing.
My view is that if any public official or member of any campaign is contacted by any nation state or anybody acting on behalf of a nation state about influencing or interfering with our election, then that's something that the FBI would want to know about.
So we're all in agreement here, right?
The
FBI director says that's what should happen.
The FBI director is wrong.
So now what? I mean, presidents breaking the law. That's a situation with which we are now familiar in this country. We are currently discovering the limits of our ability to address that situation, but it is not a brand new experience for us. We also have some experience with presidents directing people around them to break the law. But a president who publicly, even gleefully tells Americans to break the law, you break the law, and you break the law. Let's all break the law together. I don't think this is something we've dealt with before. And every government official who is not the president has to decide every day how to navigate this new terrain. Joining me now, Chuck Rosenberg, the former U.S. attorney and senior FBI official, and, as we mentioned, formerly the acting head of the DEA. He's also an MSNBC contributor. Chuck, good to have you here with us tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ali.
We used you in the setup to explain what had happened when you were the acting head of the DEA and the president made those comments to law enforcement officials about not being so nice to victims and the position you took. You had to take it upon yourself to write an email to your staff to say, this isn't the way we do business. After Donald Trump made his comments about accepting foreign campaign help, a number of law enforcement veterans told Politico that Trump's comments had, quote, undone months of work, essentially inviting foreign spies to meddle with 2020 presidential campaigns and demoralizing the agents trying to stop them. Tell us what the effect of the president saying something like that has on the people who are charged with keeping our elections safe.
Sure. I think that Politico article was both somewhat hyperbolic, Ali, and somewhat accurate. Let me explain that. Sure, the president's criticisms will demoralize the agents, but don't think for a minute that they're going to stop the work they're doing because the president says something irresponsible or odious. Look, if you read Volume 1 of the Mueller report, he made it very clear that the Russians started this effort in 2014, long before Donald Trump became president. We also know the Russians wanted to help Donald Trump become president. Now we see why. But the work of the men and women of the FBI was going on long before he became president, will go on long after he is the president. This is a current, ongoing, serious threat. The president's words do not help. They are irresponsible. They are odious. They do not help. But they will not stop the men and women of the FBI and the men and women in the intelligence community from doing their work to protect us. That's just a simple fact. Do they help? Absolutely not. But they will not stop working to protect us.
Chuck, those of us who believe that the institutions of this country work independently, they work under a set of rules like the FBI did when you were there, like the DEA does. What are we meant to think, though, when the president says this? What does the system allow for in terms of people to push back? You, as the head of the DEA at the time, sent a letter out. I assume that assuaged some unease at the DEA. But the FBI is something that the president targets all the time.
Yes, he does. And look, that was a hard letter to write, and in some ways a harder letter to send. I did it internally. Didn't intend for it to be disseminated publicly, but I knew there was a risk of that. And the thing you want to avoid is dragging your agency into some public debate, right? The men and women of the DEA do difficult, important, and dangerous work, and they do it well. And you don't want to drag them into a debate, and certainly not into a political debate. And I think that's the calculation that any leader has to make. It's certainly the calculation that Chris Wray has to make as the director of the FBI. And so you cannot respond every time the president says something irresponsible. Because, Ali, you'd be responding 9 times a day. And Chris Wray has more important things to do than to address each and every utterance of this president. Please believe what I tell you. There are 37,000 men and women in the FBI. 36,999 are apolitical career civil servants, and they will continue to do their work.
Chuck Rosenberg, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for joining us on a Friday night. Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. attorney, senior FBI official, former acting head of the DEA, and now an MSNBC contributor.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.